Today I want to talk about writing a research proposal. This will happen at some point in your career, whether you're writing a proposal for a master's dissertation or applying for funding from a research council. Somewhere along the line you're going to have to write a research proposal, and you will be thinking you probably start with a basic idea. Bright idea you have about something you want to be looking at, and you'll be looking for a gap in the research literature. And then you'll design the research study to fill that gap, and eventually you'll collect, analyse data, write a report, and think about where you're going to get that published. That's your general starting point, probably. Now, I've got in mind a book that's written by two friends and former colleagues of mine, Gavin Fairbairn and David Cantner, and that's about how to become an academic author. And they say that approach is the approach of a novice writer. They say a lot of interesting things, but the one that sticks in my mind is that they say novice researchers think that they go from the idea, they plan the design, they design the research, they collect the data, they write the report, and then they think about publishing. And they say, well, an experienced author doesn't do that. They start with the idea of where they want to publish, what they want to publish, what it is they want to end up saying. They start with that. You've got a hunch, you've got an idea at the back of your head. I think, for example, I've got a hunch about how people make decisions. I think that people make decisions that suit them, and if you see somebody that you think is making a decision that's mistaken, you're not thinking about it the right way round. You're thinking about it from your point of view, not from their point of view. Every teacher thinks that students should stay on in school for as long as possible. And they think that if a student drops out, leaves school early, they're making a mistake. They're doing something that's wrong. They're doing something that's in some way pathological. Now, I don't think that. I think that if you want to know why they're dropping out of school, you want to know why they're not following on in your footsteps, you've got to see it from their point of view. What are they getting out of it? How does it work for them? How do you make... So I've got an idea of what I want to say. And then I go back to look at what other people are saying. And I think that most people are looking at it from the point of view of, is what makes sense to me. Me as a teacher, I think staying on in school is a really good idea. Why are people not doing what I think they should do? Nobody thinks there's a gap in the literature there. There's no gap. It's that they're not looking at it the way that I want to look at it. I've got to go back there and explain. I actually hate the expression, a gap in the literature. You've got to go back and explain why there is a gap. You've got to make the gap. There are no gaps laying around. You've got to make them. So you take your idea of what you want to say and you see where it fits into the extant literature. You try to see what that... And then you plan a research study to collect data that will support your conclusions. Now, you're not going to just look for the data that supports your conclusions. If you're a good arguer, if you're presenting a strong case, you've got to take into account data that doesn't fit with your idea. If you've got good studies out there, you've got to explain how it is your explanation is better. You've got to look at the counterexamples. So when I say you're looking for evidence that supports your conclusion, I'm not saying you only look for the data that is obviously supportive of your conclusion. Nobody wants you to go cherry-picking the evidence and making your study a biased... No, you've got to look at all the evidence and see how it fits into your pattern and how you collect it and analyse it. So now you've got you don't want somebody to come along with your report and say, oh yes, but there was a much simpler explanation for this. I mean, we all know about, you hear hoof beats in the background, you think horses and not zebra. If your report says the answer is zebra and somebody comes along and says, oh yes, but there's a much simpler explanation, it's horses, you're not going to be successful. You've got to have weighed all the evidence, not just cherry pick the evidence that you like. So you're starting, the place to start with is, to start a research project is your imagination. Imagine what you would like to be saying a year from now, 2 years from now. When you've got to the end of this project, what is it that you want to be able to say? What is it that you hope to know at the end of that research project that you don't know now? What evidence do you hope to have collected that supports your case? And think about this, because it means that you're going to be starting from the beginning. Writing a dissertation is not something that comes at the end of a research project. You've got a goal. Producing a coherent, well-argued thesis runs through everything you do up to that point. And in exactly the same way, you've got to be able to say when you're applying for research funding, when you're looking for somebody to put money into your research project, you've got to be able to say, well, in 2 years' time, I'm likely to be able to answer this question. These are, in the technical terms that we use these days, these are the deliverables. I'll have a report that says what the answer, how people make decisions to stay on at school or leave school. I'll have an answer to that question. I'll be able to tell you how to persuade more people to stay on in school. These are the things that I'm hoping to come out from my research process, and my research process is designed to answer those questions. This is not going in with a closed mind. This is not deciding beforehand what you're going to find in your research. It's going to tell you what you're hoping to find, but you're going to look at everything that's evidence for you with an open mind. So yes, you start with a hunch. I start with a hunch about how people work. I start with a hunch about what kind of decisions people make, who's making the decisions, and how this. I've got a gut feeling about those things. I've got an idea about what I want to say next year when I've done some research on this, when I've done whatever the research is, whether it's reading the literature, whether it's reading secondary literature, whether it's going out and getting questionnaires filled in, whatever it is that I need doing, then I will be collecting that evidence, and I've identified a gap. I've made the gap, not identified it, but I've made the gap saying what is being done by most people in this area doesn't fit with my original hunch. I've got an explanation of why they're falling short, because they're not taking the decisions that people make seriously. They're seeing the decision as a kind of mechanical response to the environment or whatever it is that they're doing. I've made that choice. I've shown how that is working in the extant literature, and then I'm doing my research study to collect evidence. And to me, this is the way research should work. It's the way good research does work, in my view. And it's not about going out and collecting data and seeing what theories emerge. That seems to me to be an impossible goal, even if it was a desirable one. You start with a hypothesis in your head, something that you hope to be able to say at the end of the year, and then you go and weigh the evidence carefully and see how the evidence fits into your hypothesis that you're putting forward. And if you find evidence that's against your hypothesis, of course you must take it into account. You must deal with it. You must either modify your hypothesis or you must see how you can interpret the data differently. But the idea of going into this process with a completely blank slate, your mind completely empty, that seems to me such a nonsense. that I'm not even sure that I understand why people would think it's desirable to do what they call grounded theory, because you go into this with something in your head, and it's not humanly possible to ignore and put aside, bracket off what's in your head already, and I'm not even sure it's desirable, because you would not be knowing what you'll be looking for if you go out with a completely blank mind. So the important lesson here, I think, is that designing the research process for people who have experience of research, it starts with the idea of the report. What is it you'd like to be able to say? I want to be able to say, education systems don't work the way people have been thinking about them. They work this way because I've got a hunch about how people think. I've got a hunch about people wouldn't carry on doing things if they weren't to their own advantage. A report that simply says people are dropping out because they're not properly informed or they're making the wrong choices is not fundamentally satisfying to me. So I've found a research gap. It's not a gap in the sense that there's a hole in the research. It's, in my view, there's something missing in the research that's not being taken into account, and I'm going to do a study to show how it works. So, for many people, this will be turning the idea of how to write a research proposal on its head. But it's clear that if at a later stage in your career, when you're applying for funding and you want people to put money in, they've got to have some idea that you're going to come up with an answer. They want to know roughly what that answer might look like. And if you can tell them fairly accurately what you're hoping to find, they're more likely to put money in than if you just say, well, I just want £1 million to go on a fishing expedition and see whether I find something out, see if I find some correlation in the data that is illuminating. They're not going to be wanting to finance something that's as vague as that. This starts earlier. It should start earlier when you're writing your proposal for your thesis study, for your master's dissertation. Think about what that research result is going to look like. What is it that you really want to say? And can you condense that into, well, typically a 10-minute conference presentation or a talk over a cocktail party? Can you get across to somebody your excitement and interest about what you're hoping to find out in the near future? So my advice on terms of writing a research proposal is that you turn it around and you look at it from the other end. You look at it from the end that Fairbairn and Kantner suggest. Look at the report first. Look at the hoped for report. Of course, there are twists and turns. Everybody presents a research proposal as though it's a linear process from beginning to end. Now, of course, there'll be bumps when you've designed a research study, you start collecting the data, and you have to go back and rethink. It's a recursive process. The answers you get in your report will not be exactly the ones that you anticipated at the beginning. Research would be no fun at all, and in fact, if we knew the answers at the beginning, there wouldn't be any point in doing the research. So, although there are twists and turns in this, it's not a linear process from beginning to end, but turn it around and think seriously about what you hope will be the things you can say at the end of your study, whether that's a 1-year project for a master's program, or whether it's a 3-year project for a funded research project, or whether it's what you hope to be able to say at the end of a lifetime of researching. Those different scales will have different dictates as to what it is that you're hoping to achieve within your research program. So start thinking, imagining what it is you would like to be concluding from your research, and let that be the guide for what you do in designing and putting together a research proposal.